My parents want me to delay my wedding for 2 years so my sister can recover from her divorce and remarry, but I'm not putting my life on hold for her. I'm Lexi, 27, and my whole family is mad at me. Before you judge me, please hear my story. I have a sister named Rose, 32, who got divorced a few months ago. It's been a tough time, and I've tried to be there for her. But honestly, Rose and I have never been close. She wasn't a good older sister. She and her group of friends tormented me for years, and my parents never stepped in. I always felt like an outsider in my own family. Fast forward a few months, and Rose is divorced. She's devastated. She didn't work, so she had to move back in with our parents. I'm not close to my parents or Rose, so it hasn't really affected me much. The thing is, even growing up, I always felt like the black sheep. Rose was the golden child. She did everything right, had perfect grades, was prom queen, and my parents adored her. Meanwhile, I was the rebel, the difficult one. I got into arguments, broke curfew, dyed my hair crazy colors, the usual. But the worst part was how Rose used to make me feel. She bullied me, not casually, but as if she made it her mission to exclude me. She'd make plans with her friends in front of me, spread rumors about me at school, and made it clear I wasn't welcome. And then there was my parents' reaction, or lack of it. No matter what Rose did, they were always on her side. I remember telling them about the things she said to me once, and they brushed it off with, "Oh, that's just how sisters are." It hurt a lot, and I've carried that resentment into adulthood. However, about a month after my sister's divorce, my partner Joshua, 29, proposed to me. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. I'd been waiting for this moment for a while. Joshua and I had been together for almost 4 years, and we'd talked a lot about marriage. So when he finally proposed, it felt like everything fell into place. Naturally, I told my parents right away. Even though we weren't exactly close, I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be something that brought us together. I started planning the wedding almost immediately. Venues, dresses, flowers, you know how it goes. I was so excited to share this moment with my friends and the few family members I do have a good relationship with. But then, a few weeks later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded serious and told me they had something important to discuss with me. Honestly, my first thought was that it might have something to do with Rose and her post-divorce situation. I just had a feeling that whatever was coming wasn't going to be good. So I went to their house the next night, bracing myself for the worst. Sure enough, my mom didn't take long to get to the point. She said they expected me to postpone my wedding for 2 years. Yes, 2 years, because Rose had just gotten divorced. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Postpone my wedding because my sister got divorced? It was so absurd that I actually laughed, thinking it had to be a joke. But no, she was serious. She explained that Rose was still heartbroken and needed time to get over it and possibly find another man, and apparently, my wedding would interfere with that process. I was stunned and asked my mom if she was serious. I mean, how could she even think my wedding had anything to do with Rose's love life? My wedding, one of the most important days of my life, was supposed to be delayed because of Rose's poor decisions? Then my mom hit me with the classic line, "It's time to be there for the people who love you." I've heard that from her a million times. It's always about supporting Rose. It's like they expect me to just be this silent, supportive figure in the background, always putting her needs first. It was impossible not to be angry about what she was asking. I told my mom this was ridiculous, completely absurd, and that I couldn't believe she had the nerve to ask me such a thing. Then I just left. I didn't want to stick around to hear more nonsense about it. But it didn't stop there. My mom kept calling me over the next few days, trying to convince me that this was the right thing to do, and that it wasn't just about Rose, it was about the whole family. She kept saying it would be unfair to Rose to attend my wedding while she was dealing with her divorce. But, when has life ever been fair? Things don't stop just because someone is going through something. I'm not getting married to make Rose feel bad. I'm getting married because that's what people do when they love each other. I just want to get married and start my life with Joshua. My dad even got involved, which was surprising because he usually stays out of this kind of drama. He tried to reason with me, saying how much Rose was suffering right now, and that having a wedding at this time was tactless and out of touch with the situation. He made it sound like my wedding was some huge burden on her, like my happiness was making her feel even worse. But again, I don't see how that's my problem. I can't control how she feels, and I certainly can't put my life on hold indefinitely just to spare her feelings. After that, my parents kept calling and pestering me for days. Every time I saw their names on my phone, I already knew it was going to be another session of emotional manipulation to get me to postpone the wedding, so I stopped answering. Honestly, I was starting to lose my patience. My sister, on the other hand, hadn't said a word to me. It was all coming from my parents, and I started wondering if this was really what Rose wanted, or if my parents were just projecting their own issues onto me. After a week of back and forth, I decided to take matters into my own hands and called Rose directly. At first I tried to keep calm, I just wanted to clear things up. I asked her outright if she'd asked our parents to tell me to postpone the wedding, or if they were just overreacting on their own. And that's when she confirmed it. Yes, she thought it would be better if I postponed the wedding. Her reason? She said that at the wedding, all the family members would ask her about the divorce, and she didn't want to deal with those questions. I was stunned. I understand that a divorce is a big deal, but we're talking about a wedding, one of the biggest days of my life. Why should my wedding be overshadowed by her concerns about what people might say to her? I told her as calmly as I could that this was my wedding, and I highly doubted anyone would bother her with such personal questions at an event meant for something else. Let's be realistic. At weddings, people are busy focusing on the couple, the food, the dancing, and their own lives. Who's going to approach Rose to ask uncomfortable questions about her failed marriage at my wedding? But of course, she wasn't willing to listen. She just kept insisting she wasn't emotionally ready to face everyone, and that if I really cared about her, I'd consider waiting until she felt stronger and more prepared to deal with the attention. The more she talked, the angrier I got. Finally, I was blunt with her. I told her the wedding was happening, whether she liked it or not, and that it would take place with or without her or our parents present. I wasn't going to put my life on hold just because she felt insecure about what people might say. That was her problem, not mine. After hanging up, I immediately called my parents and told them the same thing. I said, "Look, I love you, but I'm not postponing my wedding. If you want to support me, that would be great. If not, I'll understand. But the wedding is happening with or without you." As expected, my mom started crying, saying I was tearing the family apart and that Rose needed time to heal. But by that point, I'd made up my mind. There was no going back. And the wedding did happen. 3 weeks ago, I married Joshua, and it was beautiful, even though my parents didn't attend. I'm not going to lie, walking down the aisle alone was tough. There wasn't anyone to replace my father. I'd always imagined that moment with my dad by my side. But as I walked toward Joshua and saw his face light up with a big smile, I realized I was doing this for us. Not for my parents, not for Rose, not for anyone else but Joshua and me. And honestly, that was enough. I felt at peace with my decision. I was surrounded by my closest friends and the few family members who truly supported us. Once the ceremony was over and we got to the reception, things got a little tricky. Most of my extended family attended, including some aunts, uncles, and cousins who hadn't been involved in the drama. But they noticed. They noticed my parents weren't there, and of course, they were curious. People started asking, "Where are your parents? Is everything okay?" I knew it was only a matter of time before I had to explain the whole situation. At first, I tried to dodge the questions. I didn't want to bring family drama into the day, but the curiosity kept growing. Finally, I sat down with some of my aunts and cousins and told them everything. How my parents had demanded I postpone the wedding, how they wanted me to put my life on hold for Rose's sake, and how they ultimately chose not to come when I refused to give in to their demands. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I was tired of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. The reactions were unexpected. Some were horrified that my parents would ask something so absurd, while others were angry on my behalf. It felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders to finally share my side of the story, and it felt good to know that some family members understood what I'd been dealing with. As the night went on, more people found out about the story, and by the end of the evening, it was practically common knowledge. I thought there might be some backlash, but instead something unexpected happened. My parents started being ostracized by the rest of the family. It was as if this whole ordeal had opened everyone's eyes to how they had treated me all these years, putting Rose first, expecting me to always play second fiddle. People started reaching out to offer their support, saying things like, "I had no idea it was this bad," or "You did the right thing by standing your ground." Then something even more surprising happened. A cousin of ours, who's getting married next month, uninvited my parents from her wedding. Apparently, she wanted to take my side and send them a message that people's weddings are not something to mess with. I didn't expect that at all, and it was the best feeling in the world. For years, I felt like an outcast in my family, like I was the one always causing trouble or not being understanding enough. But now, people were starting to see that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't all my fault. After the wedding, Joshua and I went on our honeymoon for a week, and it was honestly the perfect escape. We went to a beautiful beach resort, just the two of us, far away from all the family drama. I barely checked my phone during the trip. I just wanted to enjoy our time as newlyweds. I knew there would be messages from my parents and probably from Rose, but I tried to postpone dealing with the drama until we got back. It was hard because the temptation to look at my phone was there, but it was our time to relax and start our life together on the right foot. Once we got back, I couldn't avoid the reality of everything that had been happening. I decided to finally listen to the voicemails that had piled up. Instead of my parents trying to talk or even attempt a civil conversation, the messages were filled with insults and nastiness. My mom called me a spoiled brat, among other colorful terms I'm not sure I can write here. My dad's tone was more of the same, and at one point he even said I was destroying our loving family. It wasn't just anger, it was downright hateful. There were manipulations, passive-aggressive comments, constant accusations of selfishness, and other criticisms. At first I ignored the messages, thinking they'd calm down after a few days, but that didn't happen. In fact, things only escalated. They started calling even more, leaving voicemails filled with the same venom. When I blocked their numbers, they found other ways to contact me: email, Facebook, and even Instagram. It was as if they were on a mission to harass me. My sister, who hadn't said a word since the wedding, finally chimed in, sending me long messages about how I had ruined the family by choosing Joshua and my happiness over the family's unity. At one point, they even started using new phone numbers to bypass being blocked. I'd block one number, and within a few hours they'd pop up again with another. I know I shouldn't answer, but I work with clients and often receive calls from unknown numbers. It felt like I was playing a twisted game of whack-a-mole, but instead of moles, it was toxic family members who couldn't take no for an answer. I admit, I started feeling really frustrated. What do you do when your own family won't leave you alone? I talked to Joshua about it, and he's been supportive throughout all of this. He's suggested everything from changing my number to personally going over to punch my dad to put an end to it all. Of course, I'm not going to let him do that and get into trouble, but I need to find a way to put an end to all of this once and for all. A way to show them they can no longer manipulate or try to intimidate me like they used to. So, I'm open to ideas, as long as they're legal, of course. Update 1. Many of you have asked what my life was like when I was younger, so I thought I'd share a bit more about my family dynamics. Honestly, there's no big dramatic story. No key moment when I realized my family wasn't on my side. It was more a series of small details that made it clear I was a stranger living among them. It's a little hard to explain without sounding ungrateful because, technically, my parents did what they were supposed to do. I had food, clothing, went to school, and sometimes we even went on family vacations. But I never felt truly loved or valued. Growing up, my parents were always much more focused on my older sister Rose, and not just in the typical sense of the older sibling having more responsibilities. She was the apple of their eye, and I was the difficult one who needed to mature. I'd bring home good grades or try to show them something I was excited about, and they'd respond with a half-hearted, "That's nice, Lexi," but it was always a response lacking interest, just so they could quickly shift back to focusing on Rose's day. She was always the center of their attention, and I was just there, taking up space. It's hard to describe how isolating it feels as a child to be constantly pushed aside like you're invisible. And it wasn't just once, it was a pattern repeated over and over throughout my childhood. I think I was about 16 when I had a pretty serious falling out with a group of friends at school. It was one of those teenage things that felt like the end of the world at the time. I came home crying, hoping for a bit of comfort or maybe even some advice. I wasn't expecting a full therapy session, but a simple, "it'll be okay" would have been nice. Instead, when I told my parents about it, my dad literally said, "It's probably your fault, you should learn to pick better friends." That was it, no hugs, no encouragement, just blame. Meanwhile, if Rose came home with the tiniest problem, they'd drop everything to help her. If her favorite food wasn't served at school, well, then Mom would sit with her for 2 hours to have a full heart-to-heart to make her feel better. Yeah, it was that ridiculous. And speaking of Rose, let's talk about her for a moment. She wasn't exactly the model of a supportive older sister. In fact, she seemed to go out of her way to make my life miserable whenever she could. She had her little group of friends, just as arrogant as she was, and they thought it was hilarious to torment me. They'd do things like hide my belongings, make fun of my clothes, or even prank call the house pretending to be people from school saying awful things about me. They might sound silly now, but as a kid, those things really crushed my self-esteem. And the worst part? My parents knew what was happening. I'd tell them what Rose was doing, and they'd just shrug and say, "She's just teasing you, Lexi, it's a sister thing." But it never felt normal to me. There was one particularly bad incident when I was about 13. Rose and her friends convinced me to play a makeover game with them. I should have known it was a bad idea, but I was so desperate for some attention or acceptance from my sister that I agreed. They proceeded to plaster my face with makeup in the most ridiculous way possible, making me look like a clown. Then, without my knowing, they took photos and sent them to people at school. The next day, everyone was laughing at me. When I came home crying, my parents just said, "It's a joke, don't be so sensitive." No punishment for Rose, no sympathy for me, just the same old suck it up. Looking back, I realize these were the foundations of the relationship, or lack thereof, I have with my family today. I spent years trying to earn their approval, to make them see me as someone worthy of their love and attention, but it never worked. They were too busy with Rose and her problems to care about me or what I was going through. Honestly, I think that's why I am who I am today. Someone who has learned to be independent and stand up for herself even when it's hard. That's why, when the wedding drama happened, it wasn't the first time my family had let me down. It was just the straw that broke the camel's back. I spent years being the second choice, or rather, the third or fourth, the last resort. And when they asked me to postpone my wedding for Rose's sake, it felt like the final straw. It was like they hadn't learned anything from all the times they put her first and me last. They expected me to keep playing the same role I always had, the one who sacrificed her happiness for the sake of family unity. But I couldn't do it anymore. I finally chose myself, and it feels like a huge weight has been lifted off my shoulders. So, yes, that's the essence of my childhood. Nothing overly dramatic, but definitely a lot of emotional neglect and favoritism that left its mark. It's taken me time to move past it, but with my wedding and Joshua by my side, I've taken the first steps to finally let go. Thank you for reading, and I appreciate everyone who has reached out with advice and kind words. It means a lot, and I'm learning that it's okay to set boundaries even with family. It's hard, but I know I'm doing what's best for me. Update 2. I wanted to share some updates because a lot has happened since my last post. Unsurprisingly, my parents found another way to bother me. They sent me a message from a new number saying they wanted me to pick up my childhood belongings from their house and that I needed to come by on Sunday. The message was cold and abrupt, but at this point, I was pretty fed up. I figured I'd just go and get my things, and that would be it. So I responded with a simple okay, trying not to make a big deal out of it. But when I got there, Joshua came with me for support. What I saw was ridiculous. All my things were already outside on the lawn, piled up like it was some garage sale no one wanted to attend. And they weren't neatly arranged. It looked like they had been thrown out there haphazardly, as if they'd been sitting there for hours, maybe even days. Some of my old books were damp from the morning dew, and many of my childhood clothes and toys were dirty, as if they'd been left on the grass for quite some time. I could see water stains on items that really mattered to me, old photo albums, sentimental keepsakes. It wasn't about the things, it was the obvious disregard. It was as if they were sending a message saying, "We're done with you." But as angry as I was, I knew they wanted me to explode, to scream, to cry, to demand an explanation. I could imagine my mom watching from the window, waiting for my reaction. And honestly, I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. So instead of losing my temper, I stayed calm. I turned to Joshua and asked him to help me load everything into the truck. We didn't speak to my parents, didn't knock on the door, didn't ask for an explanation. We just loaded the truck in silence. I think Joshua realized I was holding back, but he didn't say anything, he just helped me finish. It was strange because as we packed everything, I realized something. I wasn't sad. I wasn't devastated or heartbroken, I just felt relieved. This was the last thing tying us together, so there were no more excuses to keep dealing with them. That they'd thrown out my stuff like this felt symbolic. It was as if they were finally showing, without a doubt, that I was no longer welcome in their lives. And instead of feeling sad, I felt free from the emotional games, the manipulations, and the constant expectation that I needed to try everything to fit into a family that never made room for me. I felt like they were cutting the last tie, and honestly, I was more than ready to let it go. So this update feels like a good closing chapter for my story. Update 3. I know it's been a few months, but something incredible happened, and I had to share it with you. Remember my sister Rose? Yes, the same sister who was too heartbroken and devastated after her divorce to attend my wedding. Well, it turns out she's getting married next week. I swear I'm not making this up. The woman who claimed she needed at least 2 years to recover and find a new man is walking down the aisle in less than 7 days. The irony is too much. I didn't hear it from her or my parents, who haven't spoken to me since the wedding fiasco, but from one of our cousins. She sent me a screenshot of Rose's engagement announcement on social media. I was at home, busy with my own stuff, and boom, there was Rose, all happy and in love, showing off her ring with her new fiancé as if the drama from last year had never happened. I had to laugh. I couldn't even get mad. Just a few months, and she's more than over the divorce. I don't know why she made such a fuss over my wedding then. I feel like I've officially been erased from their lives since I wasn't invited, and honestly, the feeling is mutual. After everything that's happened, I'm not even interested in being part of their lives anymore. Update 4. It turns out my parents and Rose had their own little drama, and somehow they managed to make me a part of it. Unintentionally, of course. As you may remember, my parents have practically erased me from their lives since my wedding to Joshua, or, well, only when it's convenient for them. To them, it's like I don't exist when it comes to family support, but this time they made me the protagonist without me even knowing it. It turns out that until about a week before, I didn't even know Rose was getting married, so let alone know any details or have been involved. The drama started because a large group of family members had RSVP'd to Rose's wedding after my parents insisted quite a bit, pressuring everyone and using the excuse that Rose would feel devastated if she didn't receive the family's support, especially after going through such a tough divorce. Now, everyone following this story knows her divorce, rather than devastating, was a process that lasted less time than it takes to plan a family vacation. The proof? Within a few months, she was engaged again and planning a wedding. So, although many family members please replied, they did it mostly to get my parents off their backs, even though they really didn't plan on attending. They weren't happy with how my parents and Rose had treated me through this whole mess, and the circumstances of her painful divorce left a lot to be desired. When the big day arrived, approximately 25 family members who had RSVP'd simply didn't show up. This left the wedding half empty, with a total of about 60 guests, including my parents, Rose, and her fiancé. So, as you can imagine, there were a lot of empty seats and awkward stares. Naturally, my parents and Rose were furious, especially Rose, because after all their pushing, nearly half the guests were absent. And here comes the most surreal part. They decided to blame me for what happened. According to them, I poisoned the minds of the family members to boycott the wedding. But as I already mentioned, I didn't even know there was going to be a wedding until a few days beforehand. I had nothing to do with it and only found out about the aftermath a week later. It all came to my attention when my parents decided to post an open accusation on social media, blaming me for the lack of attendees. I didn't even get to see the post because they deleted it a few hours after it was published. Why? Because several of those family members started commenting on the post, explaining that they chose not to attend as a protest against the way I had been treated, especially after they insisted so much on Rose's supposed devastation, which clearly wasn't so bad if she got engaged again in the blink of an eye. One comment even said, "She was devastated, in someone else's bed." When my parents tried to argue with the family members responding to the post, more people began chiming in, some of whom had attended the wedding, like the family members of her fiancé, who had no idea about all this. Seeing the situation only getting worse, my parents had no choice but to delete the post. The funniest part of all this is that Rose's new in-laws were completely unaware of what was happening, and only learned about it from the rumors and comments circulating after the wedding. I didn't even have to get involved. For once, their actions and favoritism had consequences they couldn't hide, and I didn't have to defend myself or explain anything. My parents and Rose had to face the consequences of their actions without me lifting a finger. Update 5. It seems that comment about my sister being devastated in someone else's bed might have been more accurate than it seemed at the time. Whether the commenter had inside information or just got lucky, it turns out my sister was pregnant, and that was the real reason for her rushed wedding. Apparently, her fiancé's family is quite religious and would never have accepted a pregnancy before marriage, so the wedding was organized in a hurry, as if Flash himself were planning it. I heard this from someone close to them, and given how specific the information is, it's hard not to believe it's true. The last I heard, her husband's family was furious, feeling deceived because neither Rose nor my parents told them about this before the wedding. But now that they're married, there's not much they can do beyond trying to come to terms with the situation. Update 6. For those wondering whether Rose's husband was really the baby's father, here's your confirmation. Although her husband had no doubts, his family did, and they pressured him to get a DNA test. The results finally came back, and yes, he is the father.